guys, how are you? How is your Sunday? How is your weekend? I know a lot of people are getting crazy amount of snow, crazy amount of weather, where other people are thawing out. Um, I find it funny how every week I've actually at this point quit attempting to even write a sermon. I've quit attempting to even write one in advance. I just stopped because I write one and then I never give it. I probably have 15 or 20 sermons that I have never given, just sitting there. And today is no different. Today is no different. I was taking my kid to work this morning, and on my way home, I was listening to the Monkees. I love the Monkees, man. I do. Grew up on them. Watched the shows. I watched every Monkees television show. And it got me very, very nostalgic, right? And I got to, how ADHD brains do. They bounce from topic to topic to topic, and suddenly, like, music from the 60s that my parents love and played for us in the 80s turned into today's sermon. But today's sermon is not about music, and today's sermon is not about the Monkees, and today's sermon is not about the 80s or the 60s. Well, kind of. Today's sermon has homework with it. Movie homework. Today's sermon is titled, When the Jedi Scatter. When the Jedi Scatter. Today is the full moon in Imbolc. Imbolc is the first holiday before spring. It's the first pagan holiday of any new year. And it's about the promise of the light returning. It's about the promise of the light returning. It's about the promise of spring. This is also a new moon, or a full moon, in Leo. The coming of the lion. What better fitting things for those two to be together? The promise of spring, of happiness, of power, of growth again. And a full moon in Leo, which is bringing the power back. But before we talk about the moon, and before we talk about Leos, and before we talk about Imbolc, and before we talk about any of that stuff, right? We need to talk about stories. We need to talk about movies. We need to talk about mythology. We need to talk about bards. We need to talk about those kind of things. Because humanity has always taught its deepest truths to the next generations through stories, through myth, through fairy tales. And whether people want to admit it or not, Star Wars is one of the greatest modern mythologies. Modern mythologies, because it is set far in the future, right? But it's not because of lasers and spaceships and we were promised that, it's not because of that. It's because it tells the same damn story that humans have been telling for thousands and thousands of years. And that is light versus dark, power versus corruption, the empire versus the people. And what happens when those who guard the light are scattered. If you've never seen the Star Wars movies, you need to. And it's not just because I think you should see them. It's because the parallels that are happening in the world right now will spook you. There's a reason that one of the most disturbing themes throughout all of these Star Wars movies is not the rise of the Empire. That is not the most disturbing theme. It's the destruction of the Jedi Temple. Because that single moment represents something that is ancient and absolutely terrifying. The destruction of the light. When the guardians of the light fall, the world doesn't immediately notice. The imbalance spreads quietly, calmly. Now, make no mistake, the Jedi weren't perfect. They made mistakes. They argued. They fought. They disagreed. But they stood for balance, and they stood for service, and they stood for responsibility. And when that temple falls in those movies, in that mythology, the galaxy didn't just, it's evil. It didn't just become evil. When the temple falls in the movie, when the Jedi temple falls in the movie, the entire world doesn't just instantly shift to the Empire, does it? But it did become ungoverned by wisdom. And that is where we find ourselves as human beings right now. Let that sink in. We are currently in a phase of realizing that we are now ungoverned by wisdom. The temple has fallen. The temple has fallen. It fell quietly. None of us realized. None of us realized. There's not a moment that you can look back to in a movie and say, oh, that's when they blew it up right there. There's not a single moment. It fell quietly. It fell silently. It was buried. And one by one, those little wisdoms are now being removed and have been removed to the point that we now are ungoverned by wisdom. That's where we are right now. There's a quote from Obi-Wan Kenobi that is going through the collective right now. And chances are, if you are anywhere on TikTok, on YouTube, on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, if you are anywhere, then you've heard this clip from the movie being played over and over and over. His broadcast to the light. His broadcast to everyone after the temple has fallen. And there's a single quote in it that says, the Jedi Order is gone. Time has made it a legend. But here's the part that people forget about the movie, that people forget about that. The Jedi weren't gone. They were scattered. They went into hiding. I want you to let that sink in. I'm going to repeat those two things, and I want you to let those sink in. They were scattered. They went into hiding. And I know in modern history, we all have learned about this exact thing. About people going into hiding. In the last century, while people that you currently know that are alive, this has already happened. The Jedi are not gone. They are scattered. They became farmers. They became teachers. They became healers. Quiet watchers of the Force. Quiet tenders of those attuned to the Force, quiet seekers of those that were to change everything. And this is really important. This is really important, and I'm going to look directly into your eyeballs, and I want you to hear me very, very carefully. They did not stop being Jedi because they were hiding. They did not stop being Jedi because they were no longer public. They did not stop being Jedi because wisdom did not rule. They adapted. And that is where we are now. What got me thinking about all of this morning was as I mentioned at the beginning of this sermon, in going from music to driving to the 80s to so on, I started thinking about, nostalgic things. The very first movie I ever saw in a theater was The Empire Strikes Back. The very first movie. Now, granted, I was a teeny tiny little thing, right? But the very first movie I ever saw in a theater was The Empire Strikes Back. So I got to thinking about the 80s and all of this stuff. And then I got to thinking about a video popped in my head of a young man who basically was saying that Gen X broke the world. That it's Gen X's fault that we are in this right now. And I'm not going to lie, I saw that video last week and I have been thinking about it. And as I look down, it's 12:12 on my clock. I've been thinking about it ever since because there are some weight to his words. There are some weight to those words. But it's not completely correct. That's lazy history. What happened was actually this. Gen X grew up watching institutions collapse. We grew up on it. We watched the Soviet Union collapse. We watched the fall of the Berlin Wall, all on TV, in front of our faces. We watched institutions collapse. We watched countries collapse. We watched countries be dissolved into other countries. We watched promises fall. That was our daily routine. Was institutions that had always been strong collapse. Promises collapse. We watched systems rot from the inside out. But here's the interesting thing. The vast majority of Gen X didn't build the empire. Gen X had a split. In seeing those institutions collapse and growing up with movies like Star Wars and Star Trek that taught us that all people are beautiful, all aliens are beautiful, because we're all aliens. To something somewhere you're an alien. To something somewhere you look crazy. How do they only have 2 arms? How do they have 2 eyes? What is this stuff flowing from the top of their head? Is that their head? Something somewhere thinks you look crazy. They have nightmares about you because you are an alien. But Star Wars and Star Trek taught us to love those. Who doesn't want a Wookiee? Gen X was split. And as the Empire began to be created, part of Gen X went there. Part of Gen X gave into the dark side. It's reality. They did. That's why I said this video has weight. This kid's words have weight, because part of Gen X did 100% move to the dark side. And they are building the Empire as we speak. They are the Darth Vaders. They are the Darth Mauls. They are building it as we speak. As we eat, sleep, and breathe. They are building it. But the majority of Gen X did not give in to the dark side. We watched those institutions fall. And we all had that moment of realization that we knew that the temple was gone. And we went into hiding. For a long time, we went into hiding. Why do you think they call Gen X the sleeper generation, the forgotten generation? Because we went into hiding. When the Force split and those people were pulled over to the dark side, they made a conscious decision. Some towards silence and some towards survival. Just like the Jedi. And what's interesting, and this is the parallel that when I say this part, because this is really what pulled a lot of Gen X toward the Empire, toward the dark side of the Force. When I say this next part, I'm going to say it and I'm going to let it sink in. And I want you to just brain it for a minute, okay? Because when I say this, you're going to instantly hear a whole bunch of phrases and things you've been hearing a lot on the news, on social media, out of people's mouths that you know. The Empire always looks like order. That is one of the most dangerous truths that the Star Wars movies teach us, is that the Empire, the dark side, always looks like order. The Empire never calls itself evil. Ever. Never does the Empire call itself evil. It calls itself security, stability, law and order, safety. The Empire rises up in the movies when people are tired, when they're afraid, when they just want someone else to decide for them. And the Jedi don't fall because they're weak. They fall because they hesitate when it's time for action, when action becomes necessary. Because fighting is never what a Jedi wants to do. I want you to hear me really, 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 really clearly right now. This is not a time for spiritual spectatorship. It's not a time to say, well, I'm in the middle, I'm neutral. Because every movie about empires and resistances and good versus evil and right versus wrong, and Star Wars itself makes it abundantly clear. If you choose not to decide, then you have still made a choice. That is a choice. There is no sitting in the middle. There is no sitting on a fence, because it doesn't exist. There is no sitting in the middle when imbalance is running rampant. When TikTok first started in 2019, it really took off in 2020, and suddenly there was this huge rise in information, news, live streams, being able to see people across the world on a moment-to-moment basis, experience the lives of other people. And suddenly we realize that some of the things that we've been fed our entire lives, no matter what country you live in, that we've been fed our entire lives are false. Are false. And you realize that some of those things were 100% true. The disillusionment that comes with both of those realizations hits hard, doesn't it? And I want to talk to the spiritual gangsters for a minute, to the OGs, because some of us that have been in this realm for a long time, way before there was a TikTok, actually way before there was a YouTube. Some of us that have been in this realm for a long time, we have felt crazy. We have felt like the crazy cat lady saying, there is something big coming. I don't know what it is, but there is something big coming. There is something big coming. We have felt crazy. And no, we didn't see the temple fall. But here we are. Here we are. The temple fell long before TikTok. The temple fell long before TikTok. TikTok was the call to bring the spiritual people back together, to bring the Jedis back together. TikTok was the call. TikTok was the call for the Jedis to find those that were being drawn to the Force. The TikTok, witch talk, spiritual talk movement was the call for the original Jedis to come out of hiding. It was the call for the original Jedis to come out and say, here we are, let us teach you. And now look at it. Look at the millions of people around the United States and around the world that have now tuned back into their own self, their own spirit, the Force. Look at how many people now have tuned back into the Force. There is no sitting in the middle when imbalance reigns. For the longest time, I tried to stay neutral. For the longest time, I did. Right? For the longest time, I did. I have friends all over the world. I have friends from all walks of life. I have friends that range from every single color of the rainbow. I have friends in the rainbow. Never ever could I wrap my own brain around being hateful to someone because of what they look like, what they believe in. Never ever in my lifetime did I ever think that as a woman, as someone who grew up in the 80s watching all of these things, never ever did I think in my lifetime that I would have to prepare my daughter for the same fights, for the same problems, for the idea of losing the rights that my mother and my grandmother marched for. But here we are. TikTok was the call for the Jedis to train. for those who needed to find the Force and find those people to train them in the Force. TikTok was that call. And notice that I use the word was. The temple has fallen. Again. The training grounds have fallen. If you are someone who found yourself deep in the spiritual community after TikTok, if you are someone who was part of the multiple mass awakenings that have happened since 2020, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't that you just randomly came across someone's video and went, oh my God, that makes sense. I've always wanted to learn about that. You didn't just randomly decide that you like crystals one day, did you? You have always felt a pull to that, didn't you? You've always been a little different, right? You probably saw The Craft 60 times, didn't you? You probably love all of those magical movies that are out there, didn't you? If you were ever called to the spiritual realm, to the Force, to all of these things, if you were ever called to it, then now is the time that you have to stand up and you have to choose a side. You have to choose a side. If you were ever called to help people around you, do it. If you were ever called to hold space, do it. If you were ever called to feed people who are hungry, do it. If you were ever called to help people walk their path, do it. If you were ever called to help other people find the spiritual people that they need, do it. If you were ever called to do anything bigger than yourself, do it. Do it. You don't have to be public. You don't have to be out in front of thousands of people. You don't have to make videos. You don't have to do any of that. Do you think that every single Jedi Master was out in front of everybody? How many are the movies based on? The few that were out in front. There are a lot of us that are out in front. There are a lot of us that are leading the charge, that are leading the call. There are a lot of us that are happy to be out in front, on the front line. And we need those who also operate in secret. Those of you guys who operate in secret are more powerful than you will ever know. And I want you to think about Anne Frank. You remember Anne Frank. You remember the name. You remember her diary. You remember reading it. You remember the movies. You remember all of that. But do you remember the name of the family who kept her alive and allowed her to write that diary? But without that family, that account wouldn't exist, would it? How important was that family? How important were those people that operated in secret? If you have ever been called to help people that were under the thumb of the Empire, this is it. This is it. This is not the time to second guess yourself. This is the time to stand up and do it. Not later. Not tomorrow. Not when things calm down. Not when it's convenient. Not when it's a little more safe. The Empire is growing, just like it does in the movies. Spies are everywhere. Empire spies are everywhere. When it's convenient, when it's safe, when things calm down, that's not when you're needed. You're needed during the dangerous times. You're needed during the times when the Empire is rolling the stormtroopers out to obliterate things, people, planets. That's when the Jedi are needed the most. Doesn't matter what level you are. And I want to say this clearly because I think that a lot of people have been discouraged into silence. You don't have to be a teacher. You don't have to be public. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to put your face out there for everyone to see. Some of the most powerful Jedi work behind the scenes. Organize food. Share resources quietly. Offer rides. Check on your neighbors. Donate anonymously. You can protect your family while still helping the collective, while still fighting against the Empire as a Jedi. This is not cowardice, it's strategy. And no one has the right to shame someone else for the way that they choose to serve the Force. Because all of us are different, and all of us have different gifts and talents and abilities and skills and things at our disposal. So let me say this next part clearly. If someone is doing their part, even if it looks different than yours, don't discourage them. The Empire thrives on division and exhaustion. And I want you to look at all of the different Star Wars movies. They have all taught us this. The Empire thrives on confusion, exhaustion, and division. The Resistance survives because people do what they can, where they are, and with what they have. The Empire always looks like order, doesn't it? Safety. Law. Not everyone is meant to be on the front lines. Not everyone is meant to teach. Not everyone is meant to be seen. But everyone is meant to choose. Star Wars did get something right that a lot of spiritual systems avoid, that we don't talk about. I talk about it because it's always been a part of my personal spiritual journey. It's always been a part of the things I've learned, I teach. And that is that the universe requires light and dark. And I'm going to say this, and I want you guys to listen very carefully. And when I say this, some of you guys are instantly going to be like, wait, that goes against everything you just said. I want you to listen. The dark side of the Force is not evil. It is unchecked power without compassion that is evil. And the light side of the Force is not weakness. It is power that's disciplined to care. The problem is not the darkness, the problem is the imbalance. And I want you to think of anything, any ecosystem, any person, your own body. When you have an imbalance in your own body, what happens? You get sick. You have to go to the doctor and you have to fix it. Yes? An infection is an imbalance in your body. You have to go get it fixed, right? Right now, the scales are tilted. Right now, the dark side is the heavier side, and the scales are tilted. And that brings me to today, period. Just today, in this moment, right now. As I'm giving this sermon, it's February 1st. It's Imbolc, which is the promise of spring, the promise of the light returning. It is also the full moon in Leo, which encourages and illuminates all of that courage. You're feeling a little more lion-hearted today, aren't you? It encourages leadership. It encourages action. And numerologically, today is a 4, which is foundations. The foundation of what you're going to do going forward. Those are 3 very powerful, amazing things. And 3 is a very important number in the spiritual community. In life in general. None of it is ego. None of it is performative. It is the spark returning. Not the harvest, not the victory. The spark. The spark that lights the flame. The spark that brings all the Jedis back to rebuild the temple. The moment you realize that winter is not getting the final word. And I know that as I give this sermon, some of you guys are buried under winter. Literally and figuratively. And now, there's the choice that you cannot avoid. You can't sit in the middle anymore. What side are you on? Are you siding with the Empire? Or are you siding with the Jedi? And how are you going to respond going forward? Are you going to guard the light? Are you going to guard the Jedi? Are you going to guard those that the Jedi are trying to help? Are you going to help transport them? Are you going to teach them? Are you going to feed them? Are you going to clothe them? How are you going to serve behind the scenes? The Jedi always find those who need them. The Force directs you exactly where you need to be when they stop hiding. As a Jedi, when you stop hiding, the Force will always guide you to where you need to be. The Force always wakes up when someone chooses that responsibility over their own comfort. And the Empire always falls when people remember who they are. This is not a call for violence. This is not a call for war. This is a call to presence. Because if you don't think that there is a spiritual war going on behind the scenes, then you're wrong. And if you are afraid to put your face out there and do anything at all, or feed, donate, whatever, here is something that you can do. You can spiritually protect those who are, because that is needed as well. Light candles for those Jedi leaders. Light candles and protection for those that are leading the Jedi resistance. Because if you don't think that the Empire has their own spiritual protections in place, think again. That is just as important for you to protect the Jedi that are out in front spiritually as it is for you to do all of these other things. Because we need you. We need it badly. We're under attack constantly. This is not about fear. It's about choice. The Force is moving. The Force is moving. It is moving things in the right directions. It is shifting things. It is changing things. And it is putting those Jedi that choose to serve out in front of everyone else. The temple has fallen. And the spark is here to pull people back. The Force is calling. It's calling you. You need to think about how you're going to answer it.